Well, hello. I wanted to finish up a little bit of the Genesis. The reason why I didn't add Abraham, Isaiah, and Jacob and Joseph was for a reason because besides Joseph, the first three are called the patriarchs. And then I will explain Joseph in a short little video here. Basically, the patriarchs were Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They or basically you can call them Israel's founding fathers, is what they could be likened to. And it wasn't just the three of them, it was also the 12 sons of Israel, aka Jacob, because God had changed his name to Israel. The word is a combination of a Latin word, pater, or meaning father, and a Greek verb, archino, which means to rule. So basically, it means ruling ancestors who were founding fathers of a family or a clan or even a nation. So that's basically what the patriarchs mean. The big reason why I didn't add them in there because there's a lot to say about those three main characters, but to put them all together in a nutshell, they are the patriarchs. The first time that an agreement between God and human before the patriarch times was the time of Noah in Genesis chapter 6, verse 18. One of the biggest growths was Abraham's patriarchal covenant in Genesis 15 and in Genesis 17, along with the land in which his offsprings would dwell. Abraham was the ninth generation descendant of Shem, one of the sons of Noah. Earlier on, Abraham testified that God was the Most High in Genesis chapter 14, verse 22, and the righteous judge of human kind in Genesis chapter 15, verse 14, and the covenant of the promise. The line of descendants by which the covenant was to be passed was basically through Isaiah. He had many kids, but this was the one that basically the line had passed through to him as the covenant that was promised. So Isaiah's name means laughter because at the age his parents were, they laughed that they could even conceive a child in Genesis chapter 17, verses 17 through 19, and Genesis chapter 18, verses 9 through 15. Not a lot of years were recorded when Isaiah was a child. Under the patriarchal system back then, the father had the power of life and death over every living thing in their house and creature, pretty much. So that's understanding why Abraham was going to sacrifice him when it says it in Genesis. That's the understanding why, because it was a system they had back then that the father had the right to do this. Now, the marriage of Rebekah after his mother's death gave him a lot of comfort in Genesis chapter 24, verse 67. Isaiah prayed to God to covenant his heirs or his offspring after him. It would be a lamer term to put it. And the Lord gave him twins. Esau grew up to be a hunter while Jacob followed the more laid back life, you could say, really. In Isaiah's later days, his eyes failed him, and when it seemed that Esau was going to get his birthright provision after all back to him, his mother had heard about this, and she had Jacob go trick his dad so he can get those rights also. The life of Jacob, though, was the last of the three patriarchs. He was marked by migration, pretty much. Same for his ancestors. They're traveling from here to here and here and here. They never really have a capital city to call their own during the lifetime, which is pretty sad. Just before Isaiah's death, God appeared to Jacob in Genesis chapter 35, verse 9, and renewed the promise of his new name, Israel. He named him Israel by this time. The dates of this period are likely the time before 2000 BC, the early Bronze Age, but none of this is for sure. But archaeologists have evidence saying that it's anywhere from 2000 to 1500 BC. And when you fit the parts of the Bible in with it, it makes sense that it would be within the 1500 to 2000 BC, or actually 2000 to 1500 BC, because it goes backwards. But nevertheless, these are Israel's founding fathers. And one interesting part that I like to add in this, the video is almost over, is that Jacob had a time where he wrestled with God in Genesis. Then the last and final one, because there's like seven Josephs, but I'm only going to name the 4 that are in Genesis, and mainly the Joseph that comes from Jacob, or aka Israel. Joseph's name means adding. There are 7 in the Bible, but we are talking about the one in Genesis. His parents were Jacob and Rachel. He was the 11th out of the 12th son. Joseph was taken to Egypt, where he became a trusted slave. Then later on, he became the second in command below the Pharaoh, through all the things you read. Joseph had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, in Genesis chapter 41, verses 50 through 52. Later on, he is used as the tribes of Ephraim, and in Numbers, I think chapter 132 I'd put on here, but he's later on mentioned. Joseph is mentioned again, but and the other 4 that are in the Old Testament are real quick run through, because I'm not going to talk about the ones in New Testament till we get there. But in case when I get to this part, I'm not going to mention these Josephs by the time I get this part of the Bible study. But in Numbers chapter 13, verse 7, there is a Joseph that is recorded to be a spy of the tribe of Issachar. And there is another in 1 Corinthians chapter 25, verse 2, where he is the son of a Levite called Asphah. And another in the Old Testament time was in Ezra chapter 10, verse 42, where he was a contemporary of Ezra with a foreign wife. And then the last one in the Old Testament is a priest in the days of the high priest Joachim in Nehemiah chapter 12, verse 14. So that's why I didn't add them into the 4-part Bible study, because they were kind of in particular by themselves, the patriarchs and the Josephs of the Old Testament, mainly the Joseph that came from one of the patriarchs, which I don't know why they don't really count Joseph as a patriarch, because he comes from Jacob. But I guess really, if you think about it, probably the biggest reason why he was not is because he lived 99% of his life in Egypt, and most of these other ones were tribes of Israel. Well, this is why they call it that. But I thank you guys, and God bless. And I'm still working on Exodus. So probably by the end of November, I will have an Exodus Bible study out that will be pretty in-depth, like this Genesis one. There'll be parts that aren't added with it, like Moses and Aaron, because I'm going to add them as a in particular one themselves, because there's a lot to say about them. But God bless you guys, and thank you. And hopefully all this helps you to understand Genesis, all 50 chapters, a little easier. I know it did me. It helped me to understand a little easier. So just review them, save them, and go back through them anytime that you go through Genesis. And may God bless you.